That night on The Tonight Show, Keanu Reeves leaned across the desk, put his mouth close to Jimmy Fallon's ear, and said 4 words. Jimmy Fallon didn't laugh. He didn't speak. His hand, which had been reaching for his note card, stopped in the air and stayed there. Behind the cameras, a floor director who had worked 600 episodes of live television set down his clipboard. The band, which had been quietly vamping through a commercial break, stopped playing one instrument at a time until the studio was completely silent. 4 words, and the crew went still. It was a Tuesday night taping, March 2019. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Keanu Reeves was the guest, promoting a film, the kind of appearance that gets booked 6 weeks in advance and runs its course in 12 minutes of airtime. Standard celebrity interview. The segment producers had prepared their questions. The band had the walk-on music cued. Nothing about this evening was supposed to be different from any other Tuesday. Keanu walked onto the set the way Keanu Reeves always walks onto a set. Not like a movie star arriving, but like a man who has thought about something quietly for a long time and brought it with him. He sat down. Jimmy shook his hand. The audience, which had been warm all evening, gave him something beyond warmth. The particular reception reserved for people the world has decided to love, without reservation. The interview began. Jimmy was easy and good-natured. Keanu was precise and thoughtful, choosing his words with the care of someone who has learned that words, once released, belong to everyone. They talked about the film. They talked about motorcycles. The audience laughed. Everything was going exactly as it was supposed to go. And then, in the final 90 seconds before the segment was supposed to close, Jimmy asked a question that wasn't on the note card. He asked it gently, almost apologetically, the way you ask a question you're not sure you have the right to ask. He said, "You've talked before about loss, about carrying it. How do you actually do that?" The studio quieted slightly. The audience sensed a shift. Keanu looked at Jimmy for a moment, not a long moment, but a full one. And then he said something that was clearly not enough. Something that was the answer on the surface, but not the answer underneath. And Jimmy, who has interviewed thousands of people and knows the difference, leaned slightly forward. And then Keanu Reeves leaned across the desk and whispered. 4 words, caught by no microphone, seen by every camera. And the crew went completely still. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1999. Keanu Reeves wasn't always Keanu Reeves, Hollywood icon and the most quietly beloved actor of his generation. In the spring of 1999, he was 34 years old and carrying a weight that had no name in any interview, no mention in any profile, no place in the promotional materials for the biggest film of his career. He was about to become Neo, about to step into a role that would redefine him professionally for the rest of his life. And privately, at the same moment the world was preparing to celebrate him, he was living through the kind of grief that does not announce itself and does not ask permission. In August 1999, his daughter was stillborn. Her name was Ava Archer Syme Reeves. She was full term. She was planned for and wanted and loved before she arrived. And then she didn't arrive. And 8 months after that, his girlfriend, Jennifer Syme, was killed in a car accident on Cahuenga Boulevard. 2 losses, 18 months. No script for either of them. He did not disappear from public life. He did not make statements or give interviews about grief or appear on magazine covers with a narrative about survival. He went back to work, because work was the thing that gave the days a shape. He was on set for filming that required him to run and fight and be present inside his body for 16 hours at a stretch. And that, it turned out, was also a kind of answer. Not a good answer, but an answer. What most people do not know is that during those 18 months, Keanu Reeves developed a habit. He began writing letters, not sending them, writing them, to Ava, to Jennifer, to his younger self in the years before any of this happened. He wrote in a specific notebook, black cover, unlined pages, the kind sold in art supply stores. He wrote on whatever surface was available on set, sometimes just a sentence, sometimes several pages. He never showed them to anyone. He never spoke about them publicly. He simply wrote, because writing was the only place where the grief had room to exist without collapsing everything around it. He filled 11 notebooks over 12 years. In the fall of 2011, Keanu was in New York for a press event. He was staying at a hotel in Midtown, the same hotel he always stayed at, because consistency was something he had come to rely on in a life where very little stayed fixed. He ate breakfast alone at the same table every morning, in a corner of the restaurant away from the main floor, where he could watch the room without being watched. On the third morning, a man sat down at the table next to his. His name was Walter Pulaski. He was 72 years old, a retired high school English teacher from a suburb of Cleveland who was in New York visiting his daughter and her family for a week. He had seen Keanu but did not approach him or acknowledge the recognition. He simply ordered his coffee and opened a book. The book was a collection of letters, real historical letters, published in an anthology. Letters from people who had written to those they had lost, trying to finish conversations that death had interrupted. Keanu noticed the book. He asked, without introduction or preamble, what it was. Walter told him. Then Walter asked, without hesitation and without the apologetic softening that most people use when they sense they are talking to someone famous, "Are you a person who writes things down?" It is the kind of question only a teacher asks, the kind that assumes an honest answer is possible. Keanu was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. Walter had lost his wife of 44 years to cancer 3 years earlier. He had not written letters. He was a talker, he said, not a writer. He had, instead, kept every voicemail she had ever left him on an old flip phone he'd never transferred, never upgraded, never replaced, because her voice was on it, and he was not ready to be in a world where her voice wasn't somewhere reachable. He pulled the phone out of his coat pocket and set it on the table between them. Not loud, not dramatic, not for display. Just a small old phone with a cracked screen, sitting between 2 cups of coffee. Keanu looked at it for a long time. They talked about what it means to keep something. Whether keeping a thing is the same as keeping a person. Whether the object itself carries anything, or whether the carrying is entirely in the person who holds it. Walter said he didn't know the answer and had stopped needing to. He said the phone wasn't a solution, it was a companion. There is a difference, he said, between things that fix and things that stay. Keanu wrote that down on a napkin. There is a difference between things that fix and things that stay. Walter went back to Cleveland. They did not exchange contact information. The hour and 20 minutes was, like all the best conversations, entirely contained within itself. Keanu kept the napkin, folded, in the front pocket of the black notebook he was filling at the time. He transferred it to every notebook that followed. He still had it in March 2019. The years between had been full. More films. More motorcycles. More hotel breakfasts in corners of quiet restaurants. The grief had not diminished. Grief does not diminish, Keanu had said in one of the few interviews that ever came close to the real thing. It just takes up a different amount of space as you grow around it. And then, 3 weeks before the Tonight Show taping, Keanu received a message through his publicist. It was from Walter Pulaski's daughter. She wrote to say that her father had passed away 2 months earlier, peacefully, at home, at 79. She wrote to say that when she and her siblings had gone through his belongings, they found a box. Inside the box was the old flip phone, still holding the voicemails, battery somehow still functioning after years. And beside the phone, in her father's handwriting on an index card, was a single instruction. Find Keanu Reeves and give this to him. He'll understand why. She'd spent 3 weeks tracking down the right email address. Keanu read the message twice. Then he sat with it for a long time without moving. Then he called his assistant and asked her to find out if there was any way in the next 3 weeks to get a message to The Tonight Show. Behind the scenes, Keanu Reeves had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. The Tonight Show staff had been told only that Keanu had something he wanted to do at the end of the segment, something unscripted, something personal, something that would require them to stay with the cameras regardless of what happened. The producer had asked 3 times for more detail. Each time Keanu had said, "Just stay with it. You'll know when." What no one on staff knew, what Jimmy Fallon himself did not know, was that Keanu had arrived at the studio that evening carrying 2 things in his jacket pocket. The first was the napkin from 2011, folded small, transferred 11 times across 12 years of black notebooks. The second was the old flip phone. Walter's daughter had overnighted it to his hotel. He had charged it that morning in his dressing room. The voicemails were still there. He had not listened to them. They were not his to listen to. But he understood what Walter had meant when he wrote the instruction on that index card. He'll understand why. And in the final minutes before the taping began, standing in the wings while the band played and the audience settled, Keanu Reeves stood very still, with both hands in his jacket pockets, the napkin in one hand and the phone in the other. And he thought about a man who had kept a cracked old phone in his coat for 3 years because the woman he loved had left her voice on it. He thought about things that fix and things that stay. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Jimmy had asked the question that wasn't on the note card. Keanu had given the answer on the surface, and Jimmy had leaned forward because Jimmy knew the difference. And then Keanu Reeves leaned across the desk and put his mouth close to Jimmy Fallon's ear and said 4 words. The 4 words were, "She still calls me." Jimmy Fallon's hand stopped in the air. His face changed, not with sadness, not with confusion, but with the expression of a person who has just been handed something very heavy and very fragile at the same time. His mouth opened slightly. No sound came out. Keanu reached into his jacket pocket. He placed the old flip phone on the desk between them. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small cracked phone on a television desk. He said, "A man named Walter kept this for 3 years because his wife's voice was on it. He left instructions to find me when he was gone. I don't know why I'm supposed to have it, but I think I understand what he meant when he said I would." He reached into his other pocket and set the napkin beside the phone. Still folded, still the words from 2011 visible through the wear of the paper. There is a difference between things that fix and things that stay. The floor director behind the cameras had not moved in 40 seconds. Questlove's hands were resting open on his knees, drumsticks flat across his palms. The segment producer in the control room was standing instead of sitting. She had not spoken into her headset in 2 minutes. Nobody had. Jimmy Fallon looked at the phone and the napkin on his desk for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were full. He said, his voice barely above a whisper, Why are you telling me this? And Keanu Reeves said, because you asked a real question, and real questions deserve real answers. The studio was completely still. Then, from somewhere in the back of the 300 people sitting in those seats, from one person who couldn't hold it, came a single long exhale. And that exhale moved through the room the way a sound moves through water. And suddenly 300 people were breathing together, quietly, in a room that felt less like a television studio and more like somewhere else entirely. Jimmy stood up. He didn't say anything to the audience. He didn't make a speech. He walked around the desk and he put his hand on Keanu's shoulder, and Keanu nodded once. And they stood there together on the set for a moment that no producer had planned, and no rundown had accounted for, and that no amount of television experience had prepared anyone in that room to manage. The director did not cut to commercial. She just let it be. The flip phone was returned to Walter Pulaski's daughter with a handwritten note from Keanu. She has not shared what the note said. The phone is kept in the same box it arrived in, beside her father's index card, on a shelf in her home in Cleveland. The napkin from 2011. There is a difference between things that fix and things that stay, was framed by Keanu's assistant and sent, along with a separate letter, to the hotel in Midtown Manhattan where the conversation with Walter had happened. It hangs now in the staff break room, because Keanu asked them to put it somewhere the people who work there would see it every day. Walter Pulaski taught high school English for 31 years. He is survived by his daughter, his son-in-law, and 4 grandchildren who called him Grandpa Walt. He never became famous, but he gave a man carrying 11 notebooks full of grief the one sentence that mattered most. Some things don't fix you. They just stay with you. And sometimes, that's enough.